My name is Landon Potasic, and this is how I went from an atheist to a Catholic. So for some background, I was raised as a Lutheran. My entire family is Lutheran, all the way to at least my great-grandparents, and I would go to church with my family pretty often. We usually went every Sunday, and I would go to Sunday school and whatnot. But when I was around 4th grade, one of my pets would die not too long after I had prayed for it, and this would eventually lead me to becoming an atheist. So for the rest of elementary school, and really through much of junior high as well, I considered myself an atheist, and I was very strong in that sentiment. I consumed a lot of atheist content online, and I argued with my classmates a lot, and it got to the point where in junior high, when it came time to start confirmation classes at the Lutheran church, I argued with my parents because I didn't want to do something that I didn't believe in, but we ended up agreeing that I would do it just to finish it in case I ever became Christian in the future. Around that same time frame, from elementary through junior high, is when I really became interested in politics. After the 2016 election happened, I started to follow it more and more, and this just progressed as I got older, and I was constantly keeping tabs on it, and it was really one of my early interests. Things really first started changing in my freshman year of high school. I started to become much less strong in my atheistic ways, and I got to the point where I thought that Christianity, maybe not being true, was at least good for teaching morals and for laying the groundwork of a society. And that was the first major step that happened away from atheism and towards Christianity. And then in the second semester of my freshman year of high school, the COVID pandemic happened, and that ended up pushing back my confirmation at the Lutheran church all the way until my sophomore year of high school. So it was much later than any of the other churches in the area. And by the time that confirmation happened, I remember being glad that it was happening. And this was definitely a shift from where I had been when I started the classes, where I didn't even want to go. And it was to the point now where I at least believed some parts of the Bible were true, or at least good in themselves. And I was considering it a good thing that it was happening, regardless of if I believed it or not. Then later on in high school, starting during my junior year, I first started to rethink whether or not God actually existed. And a lot of this came from nature and from the complexity of the world and appreciating those things. And I started to get to the point where I was thinking that there might be a God that made everything, and that was really the next big step for me. And all of this is happening very slowly. There's never really a big moment that takes me from one step to the next. It was really just a very slow burn all the way from my freshman year into my senior year of high school, where I really started to become convinced that God did exist and that it was the Christian God. And this progressed all the way to the end of my senior year, where I became incredibly convicted by the way I was living, because I realized that the way I'm living my life is not in accord with how I should be living my life, especially as someone who's starting to follow Jesus more. And so that summer after my senior year is when I made the first big changes in my life and really took a step towards Christ. So it's at this point after my senior year, and as I'm looking to heading off to college, that I really started to consider myself a Christian. And of course with that comes the process of figuring out what church to go to, with all the different denominations and options. There's almost a dozen different churches just in my tiny town alone, and I've started to really consider where I should be going. And this is when I found myself starting to become incredibly drawn to the Catholic Church and the Catholic faith. And this really started as a result of politics. A lot of the people that I was following online happened to be Catholics, and they were very open and vocal about their faith. And so I was becoming more and more exposed to it, something that growing up Lutheran I really wasn't ever exposed to. And this is when I first started to really consider becoming a Catholic. One of the first aspects of the church that I really began to fall in love with is the proclamation of morals, and the fact that there are certain things that are right and certain things that are wrong, and that in a society where everything is now considered subjective, that there is absolute moral truths to follow, it was something that I was really, really attracted to. The next thing that followed from that is the idea of the Catholic Church being the one true church. And in a very similar way to how the church preaches morality in an age of moral relativism, the church also claims to be the one true church in an age of 40-some thousand different denominations. And so it was much of the same, being so incredibly different than the world. And the church having the ability to claim to know what is right and what is wrong as revealed by God, when so many different denominations will directly contradict each other on different aspects of the faith. And as someone who was just reconverting to Christianity and trying my best to live my life in a moral way, I was naturally drawn to that idea. And one of the greatest pieces of evidence that really convinced me that the Catholic Church is the one true church founded by Jesus is in Matthew chapter 16, where Jesus himself gives Peter the keys of the kingdom and promises that the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. He renames Simon to Peter, literally meaning rock, and says, "On this rock I will build my church." And to me, that's crystal clear. And so I really started to believe the idea that the Catholic Church is the one true church. It is the Church of Christ. So at this point, I'm in college, and I'm really starting to explore the Catholic faith. And as time goes on and I do more and more research, I try to learn more and more, and I come to the Eucharist and learning the belief that Catholics have, which I, up until that point, had never been exposed to. And so for anybody that's unaware, the Catholic belief is that communion is not just a representative symbol of the Last Supper or of Jesus' death, but rather that it is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ himself, consecrated by the priest's words, making Jesus present in the real world at that very moment. And this teaching is really at the very center of the Catholic faith, that the Eucharist is the source and the summit of the Christian life, that it is Jesus himself made present for us, that we are never more intimately united with Jesus on this earth in our time than when we receive him in the Eucharist. And these are claims that I had never heard before and that are very shocking when first heard, understandably so. But when I read John chapter 6 for the first time all the way through, and I read the Bread of Life discourse, and to see Jesus say that unless you eat his flesh and drink his blood, you will not have life within you, was pretty solid evidence for me. And not to mention the dozens and dozens of Old Testament references and parallels that this draws from, as well as the fact that the early church, as early as the 100s, you can find quotes from saints proclaiming Jesus' presence in the Eucharist. So it's during this time, in the middle of my freshman year of college, that I really began to desire to go to a Catholic Mass. And I had never been to one in my life, at least that I could remember. And despite really, really wanting to go, I was way too scared. And I ended up chickening out for a couple of months. I would delay and put it off every Sunday. And in the meantime, I did the Bible in a year and prayed rosaries and started to pray for the first time really ever. But eventually in February, I had the guts and one other person to go with. And by the time that Mass was done, I was convinced that I needed to become a Catholic. So after this, I started talking to the Newman Center on campus, and I got started on a plan to become a confirmed Catholic through the OCIA process, which is the Order of Christian Initiation of Adults. And I was concerned at first because my specific situation was going to mean that I would be in two separate places for the start and the end of the class. But the beauty of the Catholic Church comes from its universality, as well as many other things. And so I was able to do the first half of my classes where I started, and then once I was back at the Newman Center, I could finish my classes without any problems. So then during this time period, after my freshman year of college, I just fell more and more in love with Jesus and the Eucharist and the church and everything about it. And I learned more and more. I learned about Mary and the saints. I learned about the Pope, confession, the liturgy, why Catholics believe just about everything that they believe. And I just became more and more convinced of every single point. Eventually in January, before I got confirmed, I would end up doing my first confession, and that was such a grace, and it was the greatest single instance of mercy that I have ever experienced. And I won't go into depth on what my sins were, but they were of a grave matter. And the way that I lived my life for many, many years was just atrocious. And though a lot of it was hidden, it was still incredibly harmful to myself and those around me. And there was so much healing offered in the sacrament of confession, and it was just beautiful. And then that following March and April is when Lent started, and I did my first serious Catholic Lent, and come the Easter Vigil on Saturday night is when I got confirmed officially and received Jesus in the Eucharist for the first time. And it was just sheer grace, and I can't explain the way I felt at that time in words. It's truly indescribable, but it was such a blessing. And at the exact same time, my wonderful girlfriend Hannah also got confirmed in the Catholic faith, as she had her own conversion around the same time I did. And that entire process all amounted and came to a point in the Easter Vigil. And it's such a beautiful liturgy, and I encourage all of you to attend one at least once in your life. And that's where I am now. My girlfriend and I have been confirmed Catholics for a little under 2 months now, and it is absolutely the best decision that I have ever made in my life. And my plan is to make future videos going over in depth every topic and the different arguments that really convinced me of the Catholic faith and everything that she teaches. But in the meantime, I just really want to say thank you to everybody that helped me out, Father Tim and Father Mark, my sponsor, Vincent. I also wanted to thank all of the catechists that helped out during this process, especially Cindy, Mary Ellen, Martha, Sister Sarah, Shauna, Anthony, and any of those that I'm forgetting. I obviously could not have done it without their help, and so I thank them from the bottom of my heart for all of the work that they did. And I thank the Blessed Virgin Mary for her intercession. And if you have any questions about my journey or just want to hear me go into more detail about it, feel free to ask me questions, whether it's online or in real life, and I would love to expand on this. But again, I just thank everybody that was involved in this, and I give all glory to the Lord Jesus Christ, my Savior.